the people of the lake, or Achu. That's also Lake Washington, for the relationship that I have with the lake, and enabling us to have a place that's beautiful and that we can still learn from and connect with to this day. I'm really grateful to be able to learn from the land in this place. Dr. Elliott is a member of the Cowichan Tribes and is an assistant professor in the Department of Learning Sciences and Human Development in the College of Education at the University of Washington. She holds both a Ph.D. in educational psychology and a master of social work in children, youth, and families. I feel connected to her already because that's the same degree I have, that same specialization in MSW. She researches the interdisciplinary intersections, the interdisciplinary intersections of Dr. Elliott's research include culture, learning, and human development, land-based and Indigenous methodologies, and trauma, prevention, and recovery among Indigenous children and youth. By employing a strengths-based approach to healing, Dr. Elliott rigorously engages youth, families, and communities in the development of integrated educational and behavioral health interventions to address social issues. Dr. Elliott is currently partnering with members of the Cowichan Tribes to design programming to strengthen the physical, mental, intellectual, and cultural health of the community. And in speaking with students prior to this lecture, speaking to other DGH students about Dr. Elliott's upcoming lecture, they expressed their enthusiasm for her because of a guest lecture they gave in their classes. One said that usually the class felt too long, but that day the class felt too short. And that another said that Dr. Elliott had opened their mind about how many things could be. And on that day, so many people stayed after class to ask questions. So I think that that's a really beautiful sign of such good, we're in such good hands today to learn about the ontological shifts that are needed in global mental health. So please welcome Dr. Emma Elliott.
Asiamnatsiaya, Slam Utsiatala, Height Zapka, Ni Altmets Atanaquail, Yath Ut Hakwashta, Nutza Marsh following, Height Zapka. Dear friends and relatives, my name is Emma Elliott. I'm Cowichan Tribes from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And I'm really happy to be sharing some stories and some thinking with you around some of the things that I've been thinking about lately, related to Indigenous mental health, related to community mental health, related to global mental health, probably related to population initiatives too while we're at it, right? I didn't read that though, honestly. So we'll have to see. You guys can let me know. So I'm grateful to be invited to be with all of you today. I give thanks to the natural world. I give thanks to the sun, the mountains, the water, the wind, all for inviting us and sustaining us and welcoming us. Today I'm going to share a talk with you titled Designing for Ontological Shifts in Global Mental Health or Community Psychology. I'm going to give examples that are on a sort of individual and community level example, but what we're actually talking about is a global perspective or a global understanding of what needs to take place. So first, before I begin, I want to share a few photos of my family. My dad is in the middle, Gordon Elliott. He passed away in 1973, but during his short time here on Earth, he and others built a traditional fishing weir across the Cowichan River in opposition to the federal government because they said we couldn't hunt or fish or harvest for sustenance. And my mom, Della Sylvester, she'll be here on May the 27th at Carkeek Park at 11 o'clock if you want to go on a plant medicine walk with a First Nations elder and medicine person. My mom, Della Sylvester, has been learning about plants and medicine all her life from her aunties and her grandmothers. And today she still gives plant and medicine walks and she still gives lectures and she still makes sure that she's sharing her stories and her knowledge as well. And these are some of my brothers and sisters here on the bottom left. I'm one of 11, but I was raised with one of 6. Raven here She was actually adopted, and about 7 or 8 years ago, she returned to the community and saw my brother Abraham, who had Elliott tattooed on his back, and she knew she was related to the Elliots, and she saw it at the swimming pool, and they were all at the local swim or what have you. And all our life, we knew that she was Raven, our sister out there, you know, somewhere, if you will, but she had no idea that we even existed. And so here she came and she's like, hey, how do you know the Elliott? And we're like, oh yeah, P.S. 26 great grandkids and about 30 grandkids. That's the extent of our family within a 2-mile period around my mom's house. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about interdependent or interconnected understandings, or intra-relational, as in relationships between people, plants, animals, the natural, each other, intra-relational. And so today I'm just going to give a little bit of, I'm just going to give some thinking and some thoughts around designing for ontological shifts. Ontology in its simplest form is just the nature of being, the nature of who we think we are in the world, our understanding of self, our concepts or beliefs around the nature of knowledge and the nature of being, right? So in the Western ontology, for example, we have an individualistic or modern ontology of some sort. But what we're talking about today is actually this interdependent and interconnected ontology that has a lot more to do with that's all across the world, from different corners of the world, whether it's North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa. We have indigenous populations whose knowledge systems have emerged from the land itself. And those are the knowledge systems that I want to think about. Those are the knowledge systems that are consensual, that are ethical, that are sustainable. Right? So we're just going to do a little bit of thinking. I'm a learning scientist. My Ph.D. is from the College of Education in the Learning Sciences and Human Development program. I'm also a social worker. I have a Master of Social Work from the School of Social Work here in Children, Youth, and Families. Of course, you can see I'm also a mother. Caspian and Story are joining us today, and they probably heard these stories lots of times that they might be able to tell you them themselves. They said no, so we won't put them on the spot. But what I really want to dive into is this bottom part here, Indigenous storying. So I'm going to offer some stories through which we can think together about frameworks for health and healing, for learning and for well-being. And then I want to offer an example of a land-based approach that I used in a graduate seminar last quarter. That takes up some of these aspects that I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to show you what happened in that land-based seminar that I taught, and whether any of the kinds of things that we were hoping for ended up happening, and you'll see that it probably did. I'm biased, but that's what I saw. So that's sort of the journey that I'm hoping to take today. This spider web was a photograph taken by a friend of mine in my home community. And he wrote, and I don't have it here, but this incredibly beautiful understanding about Indigenous technologies and how exactly we learn from the natural world. Do you think that the way that we weave our baskets and make our clothes might have something to do with things we've seen in the natural world before? Avi. That kind of makes sense. Like, we observe the natural world, we're in relationship with the natural world. And if we can observe those processes in such a way, we can begin to understand, and our brains are also co-constituted by that specific interaction. So we got a lot going on. We are witnessing history at the moment. Young people all across North America are standing up for what they believe in. And we see this on our campuses. We're experiencing massive white supremacy around the world. We're going through this global pandemic. There's a heck of a lot of stuff going on out in the world. And when I think about what's going on in the world and what is the root cause of all of this stuff, all of the discomfort, all of the stress, and all of the trauma that this world is experiencing, to me, it has a lot to do with the way that we've come to understand who we are in relationship to the natural world. And when I think about what I'm going to offer today, I draw upon deeply my own knowledge systems from my own community, Cowichan Tribes, and the stories that the people and the elders in my community have shared with me along the way. And I draw on those stories and these knowledge systems unapologetically, because I do believe that embedded within these kinds of knowledge systems, the thousands and thousands and thousands of Indigenous knowledges that emerge from the land, I do believe that we have pathways forward. 80% of the world's biodiversity is within Indigenous held territory. That's like the living ecosystems. That's not an accident. And yet we have people who understand the world in such ways that they want to wholesale Alaska to the highest bidder or cut down Brazil. We wouldn't fare super good about those sorts of things, right? So we've somewhere along the line taken a humongous turn in the wrong direction. I don't want to freak all y'all out, but I read the IPCC report. Does anybody know what that means? Or what that report is? Like the international coming together, all the scientists who decide about if we don't get the world's temperature down to X4. That will be that. I'll let you look it up on your own. So we got to make a change, right? Some of you are old enough to know who Tupac Shakur is. Yeah, I'm not going to wrap this for you, but if you have anybody in the house, have at it. It's time for us as people to start making some changes. Let's change the way we eat. Let's change the way we live. And let's change the way we treat each other. You see, the old way wasn't working, so it's on us to do what we got to do to survive. And what I'm thinking about here in terms of understanding the way that we think about the world and who we are in the world, that's just our understanding of self or nature of being, right? However, when we look at the data and we look at behavioral sciences, including psychology, and we look at understandings of the psychological understandings of self and what those look like, 96% of the citations come from 12% of the world's population. So we're not representing the rest of those knowledge systems. And of that 12%, 76% come from within a mile of universities just like this. It's also not representative, yeah? It's, you know, we already know that these kinds of places aren't representative. So my point being, like, we are putting all of our eggs in this basket, so to speak, but are we okay with limiting diversity? Are we okay with limiting heterogeneity? What we know about learning is that learning and healing takes place within the context of heterogeneous social relationships. Heterogeneous, that's like diverse, but not in the DEI kind of way, right? And we know, you know, this individual as the priority, we know and we can think about and we can trace how these understandings of self have been developed across time. When we look at, for example, the development of literacy, and you follow and you trace and you look at the maps about how did literacy cross over from one space to the next. And then you imagine what going from an illiterate to a literate brain might do to our brain. And then you think about the ways in which we, our bodies, our brains, our minds are all interrelated, even so much as like what parts of my face you're attending to, how much time you can wait for a marshmallow, or why you would want to wait for a marshmallow in the first place. Maybe she knows what it is. So thank you. And so, you know, and then I also ask, or at least my elders ask, whose evidence? Evidence-based, right? Y'all, the evidence-based research about suicide prevention that actually prevents death by suicide are like carrying letters, carrying text messages. I'm talking about beyond means restriction. I'm talking about the evidence-based carrying letters process and scenario. But if I brought that to my elders and said, hey, guess what? We have a solution. All you have to do is send one text message a month for 11 months. Totally works. My elders would think I was bonkers, right? So just thinking about the context, thinking about the diversity, thinking about, and it doesn't mean throw those things out with the bathwater, so to speak. Those things are actually really good approaches, but all by themselves, they fall a little bit short. So there's all this history. I'm not going to go into it, but there's about 500 or so years of cultural genocide at best. Right here, take a look. Dr. Karina Walters, who was previously used to be here on campus with us in the School of Social Work, is now the National Institutes of Health Tribal Research Director. She and Dr. Danica Brown put together this wonderful timeline, and it's sort of this interactive timeline where you needed sort of history, citations, how exactly, did the land get transferred from one to the next to the other? Like all of these are federal policies and state sanctioned policies that had something to do with removing Indigenous people from their land. And then we're trying to, figure out, so, how are we or why are we experiencing some of the disparities and things like that? And that, if you go take a look through it, you'll begin to put some of those pieces together. But that's not all we are, right? We have generations of resilience. We have reasons that we've sustained ourselves and so on. But when we take a look at some of these interpersonal or psychosocial stressors, you can see the data hasn't changed a whole lot in like the last 40 years. Brown and Black people are still having a hard time. We already know about the diabetes, the hypertension, the death by suicide, the lower achievement rates and so on and so forth, right? My dad and others built that traditional fishing weir across the Cowichan River in 1973. They were fighting to make sure that we had a chance to make decisions for ourselves and for our own children. They were fighting to make sure that these kinds of things were ethical and sustainable. And what's the other word I like to use? Consequential. Except that was like 40 or 50 years ago. And then I got to the university and scholars in every corner of education are calling for these things too. We're done now. There's no more calling. We're the ones, we're the scholars, we're the people, right? We're the ones. We have to, those folks who are and have the responsibility to be the visionaries are the ones who have to now step up and say, I'm willing to contribute and do this, even if it's scary. Social cultural theories of learning. We can talk about how people learn. We can talk about the nature of Indigenous knowledge. Learning sciences is literally about how people learn. We know that learning takes place within the context of social and cultural and dynamic interactions, everyday social interactions, just like this. We know that healing also takes place within those same kinds of contexts. I went to the School of Social Work, and good thing Leah's not here because she might tell you different. But what I learned in the School of Social Work, a couple of things. But that trauma heals in the presence of caring others. That's all they said. That's literally like, that was the whole entire program, was make sure that you can learn and understand what it means to be a healing presence. And that sounds like lovely and wish-washy, but then I was like, wait a second. The neuroscientists are like, integration is all about balance and harmony across different knowledges and different ways of being. And then I went to the learning scientists and they were like, oh yeah, people learn through social and cultural and dynamic relationships across time and generations and so on. And then I went, to all of these different kinds of, and this is a simple, like this is a very simplistic understanding of the data. But when we think about how do people learn, social, cultural, dynamic, we don't exist in isolation. How do people heal within the context of those same social, cultural, and dynamic relationships? Remember, not remember, but we often have loved ones who, like, we send them off to treatment and they do so well and they've got all kinds of new skills and they might have made vision boards and they might have did whatever they do, all of these kinds of things. And they did great and they felt good about things. And then they came back to their communities and then they relapse and everybody's like, oh, yeah, they're a bad apple and they hang out with the bad people, right? And yet somehow we were okay with this whole go off and do it by yourself scenario, even though we knew healing takes place within the context of our social and cultural relationships. You know, so those people weren't like relapsing or hanging out with the bad apples. We really need to understand how to integrate these processes across these different kinds of spaces, if you will. So I felt like those were some pretty important connections. And, you know, I thought, okay, well, I want to offer Indigenous knowledge systems because this is how I understand the world. When I think about how did our people heal? How do we do assessments? How do we, whatever it is that we need to do, right? There had to have been ways. It's not like we just simply didn't assess our kids. But when I asked my mom, so how do we like make sure nobody falls through the cracks? She was like, well, it's not like we do surveys. And she was a little bit appalled by my question. But really, the way that we heal, the way that we learn, and the way that we grow is within these caring and loving communities of practice. And when I think about who I am as a person, our understanding of Indigenous concepts of ontology, if you will, is this intra-relationship between people, plants, animals, and the natural world. I'm always at any given moment thinking about the ancestors that are in the room, or the ancestors maybe that drank the same drink of water that I had. Isn't that cool? Literally, somebody 10,000 years ago drank this exact same water. It's not like we all came up with new fresh water, right? So thinking about who we are in relationship to the natural world, and then thinking about the responsibility that we have to those relationships. And it's not just a one with nature, we love to take care of the land, but it's this deeper understanding that we actually don't exist. We're our self, our being, our perspectives are all constituted by the land and the environment that we're in. So I think that these kinds of things are actually applicable to everybody because we don't exist in isolation. And so then I began thinking, okay, then what is it that we can offer that stays in alignment with the theoretical traditions of Indigenous knowledge, that it's dynamic and that it's respectful and these kinds of things. If you start learning about oral traditions and Indigenous knowledge, at least in the Coast Salish perspective, it's just kind of such an interesting dynamic because sometimes I'll have an issue or a problem, and then my mom will come up with a story about like harvesting shellfish or something, and I'm like, I don't think she got it. Like, she must not remember what it means to break up with your boyfriend when you're 19, right? And yet at the same time, she was recognizing that if we imagine that this space here with us is, you know, we have all of these different trajectories of our social existence across time, right? And maybe Leo was like this, and then the students in the class, they also cross paths with me at some point, and then all of us are here. And this whole entire space that we have ends up looking like this dynamic spiraling ball of yarn. And at certain points in time, we do actually cross paths. And to me, that would be like a snapshot of a research study, say, right? It's this one little snapshot of a moment in time. But what is this dynamic spiraling ball? Doreen Massey would probably call it space. The interaction through which all of our stories so far come here to mix together the multiplicity of our stories so far. So this idea that space isn't just like to be discovered and like vast and expansive, but more so space is this multiplicity of these social relationships so far. And so anytime we have these social relationships, right, we also have power. Anytime we have these social relationships, we're creating some kind of a space here. You can think about that same space when you maybe you're going through a hard time and your boss says, hey, how are things? And you're like, great, we went through a hard time, but yeah, we're doing okay. We're really hanging in there. The kids are strong and resilient, right? You begin framing it in particular ways. And then in the same kind of instance, you come across somebody that you know and love, and maybe you haven't seen them in a while. And you're like, how are you? And now you start bawling your eyeballs out because all they said was, how are you? How come that happened? Right? It's that historicity of that kind of the history of that time and space and that relationship. But the reason that I'm explaining this space so deeply is because right now I hear mental health and scholars talking about trauma healing and the presence of caring others. But what does that presence look like? Because I can't just show up and then you're healed, right? Or other folks talking about the importance of joy, or other folks talking about defining or finding home, right? So these are all kinds of creative types of dream spaces that we all don't always get a chance to access. And I think that there's something about those kinds of spaces that one world cultures or mono ontologies don't really want us to get too deep into. Because what happens when we start sharing food and stories across social solidarities? What happens when we start sharing our experiences and our presence? And these ideas start happening, right? And these excitements and whatnot. And if we come together, and this is a lot deeper than I have time to go here, but if we come together across our differences and across our social solidarities, there's just so much that could happen, right? So we're thinking of this individualistic versus this interconnected understanding of who we are in the world, and why they, or settler colonialism, or institutions, for example, wouldn't want us to be able to cultivate that kind of space. Why is that kind of space threatening? I mean, I don't know if I know the answer. So overall, this is the final slide of this theoretical framework. I know it's a lot of theory, guys, but hang in there. We're going to get to the stories next. So overall, when I take a look down here, I can see that there's something common about the nature of knowledge, being that it is social and culturally co-constituted. That there's something common across the nature of knowledge and how we learn and how we heal and recover from trauma or traumatic experiences. And these are drawing on both learning sciences and social work and mental health literature. But I felt like there were a lot of reasons that we would take up Indigenous intellectual traditions because of how in alignment they are with other knowledge systems in terms of dynamic and social and cultural and co-constituted and those sorts of things. So this is sort of where all this theory comes from. Was that okay? Are y'all still with me? How about in the back? Wow, you guys are doing good, still hanging in there. So that was the heaviest in terms of sort of the theory types of parts, but I do feel like all of those different people often say, well, if you were going to do a mental health program, how would this land-based approach look differently or not? Or if you're going to do an education program, or if you were going to do a what have you. Well, in our, traditional intellectual traditions, we didn't separate those kinds of things. So I'm like, well, I mean, you would still be hunting and fishing and harvesting and like gutting a deer and cutting the fish. Like you're still going to do those things, right? And I can share why. About a year or so ago, my brother Cedar was reminding me about all of the people that used to come to Deer Home where we grew up. We grew up in Deer Home, which is up in the mountains on Vancouver Island. There was no running water. There was no electricity. This was until 1987. And my parents chose this way of life so that we would have a chance to understand what it means to live in relationship with the natural world. And I was reminiscing about this with my brother Cedar, and he was reminding me about Deneen and Jim and Neelock and all these folks who came to Deer Home when we were kids. And I said, oh yeah, our misfit babysitters, I remember them. And he was like, no, because he was 11 months older than me, which meant he got privy to all the adult information. He said, no, that's not why they were coming. Deneen was 18 at the time, and she was aging out of the foster care system and running away from a foster care father who was sexually assaulting her. but she came to Deer Home. Neil Arthur Butler in 1982 found out that the researcher that separated her and her identical twin from their family to see what would happen if she was raised in a white family also found out in 1982 that she was sterilized and would never have children. So she came to Deer Home. So folks were coming because they needed healing and restoration. But my parents weren't sitting here like designing for transformative shifts or centering relationality for the purpose of identity and belongingness. We were just living our life on the land. And that was the rhythm of the life. And somehow there was something about that kind of scenario that was really, really healing for people in ways that we didn't even have to like do the designing, if you will. That kind of stuff already took place. So when it came time to figure out, okay, what am I going to study for my dissertation? It was about the spring of 2014. And I was seeing all over Facebook, like, hold your kids close and you never know what's going on. So I messaged my brother, Troy, and I asked him what was going on. And he told me that on Vancouver Island, there were 4 deaths by suicide, 3 of them from the same grandmother. So it wasn't all the same Cowichan community, but we had all been impacted in some way. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a degree. I wasn't finished with my work. I had to take that methods class. It seemed really important. So you get stuck, right? You feel like I need to go and I need to be with my family, but I have all these responsibilities and what am I going to do anyhow? I don't have any money. Remember? No harm. School of social work. See, that was the other rule, right? But I got 2 things there. Probably more. But this is my mom here. And when I told her about my fears, like I didn't know how I was going to help the community. My advisor said, go home and help the community heal from trauma. And then my eyeballs got this big. I don't even know what that means. How am I supposed to help a community? I don't have any degrees. I don't have any money. What am I going to do? They said, don't do any harm. And so my mom looked at me like First Nations grandmothers do when they know that you know the answer. She said, we sit and we eat together. Because what happens when you're eating together? How are you doing? Hi, how's your family? I care about you. It's really nice to see you, right? So all these kinds of things are happening through these different kinds of social interactions, belongingness, purpose, particular kinds of roles and responsibilities. I mean, when I go home, especially around food, I totally act different. I'm all serving elders and like getting out that coffee. I don't do this at home, in my own home at least, right? But like just knowing these kinds of things and the kinds of things that take place when we're sitting and eating together. Every single one of us has stories about food from our relatives. It might be a recipe. It might be a song, a dance, you know, an offering, special kinds of food that you eat at special kinds of year. And so what my mom was telling me when she said we sit and we eat together was that through sitting and eating together, we could heal from that trauma. We could do or shift or move something in terms of identity or belongingness or purpose, etc. You remember Tahlequah? Tahlequah carried the body of her dead baby in the Puget Sound for 17 days. At the moment that her baby died, witnesses observed about 4 other female orcas swimming around her. So she wasn't alone during her greatest time of need. And for 17 days, she carried her baby. And whenever she would need to go down for a couple of minutes to get some food, somebody in her community carried her baby for her. I wonder what Tahlequah was trying to teach us about grieving. I wonder what she was trying to tell us about the state of her people. I wonder what they were trying to teach us about communal grieving processes. What I do know is that she was also teaching us that trauma heals in the presence of caring others. And so a part of the time that I was in Cowichan, my uncle Merle knocked on the door. It was probably about 5 a.m. That girl's in my undergrad class. We just had class just before this. Super side note. Sorry, it's been a long day. But it was about 5 a.m. and for some reason I was awake and I was writing ethnographic field notes or something like that. And my uncle Merle knocked on the door and he said, Sid passed away this morning at 3. It was just a couple hours before. And so as soon as we heard this, I started getting up and organizing and I headed over to the house and started cleaning their kitchen and moving their stuff around and making a list of what needed to happen. And I started hard boiling eggs and making a big pot of mush and all the toast I could possibly toast in like probably a 2 little thingy toaster, right? But I was doing what I could. And at the same time, my brothers went over to the big house and they started hauling over the benches and bringing it into the family home, because they knew they would begin having visitors. And my mom began gathering her medicines and things that she knew the family would need too. And when these kinds of things happen in the community, you know, we have ceremonial protocols about how, about our end of life ceremonies, about our funerals, right? And when these kinds of things happen, the whole community kind of goes up into a sort of consciousness of like a school of fish, right? They all know what to do. All of a sudden, somebody's collecting feathers and somebody's getting a pouch and somebody's getting a whole bunch of scarves and like everybody kind of has a role. And there really isn't anybody being like, okay, so can you get the scarves this time? Because these knowledges are passed down through the family lines. So there's some families that have specific knowledge, like they have the right, if you will, to carry that kind of knowledge. So for example, I mentioned something about feather spreaders. My family isn't a part of that knowledge. So I would never be able to just show up and be like, hey, I want to spread feathers today. That would be so ridiculous. But my family is a family of healers. So I can think about offering in that kind of space in the same way that my mom and my aunties and my grandmothers have. So that's how, you know, like in the same way as Tahlequah, we have entire communities that come together to make sure that we don't have to go through our hardest times in life alone. I'm gonna name drop. Can I name drop? Just one small, super small. Okay, so I went to visit Noam Chomsky. And this was in about 2013, and I sat in his office for about an hour. By the way, mismatched socks, dusty books, dead plants. But he's got other things to do, right? He's a little on the busy side. Yeah, I like the kind of guy that shows up with 2 briefcases and he doesn't know where one of them is and it's like in his hand. I do that with my glasses, but it's not because I'm super smart. I think Noam Chomsky's might be because he is actually that smart. But anyway, my point is he helped me think about this idea of being in a community and what that means for our sense of possible futures, if you will, right? So what he said in 2013 was, we're going to see a rise of massive white supremacy in every single corner of the world. That was even before Trump was elected. I believed him. And then what he also said was, when we don't have the belief that our community will hold us up during our greatest time of need, that's when things get super, super hard. So whatever your community is, it's kind of this existential belief that your community will hold you up during the hardest. So what is that community? Because in Cowichan, the community that I described about the ceremonial and end of life ceremonies and stuff, we know for sure that we don't have to go through that alone, right? And so Chomsky shared with me that he imagined that the death by suicide rates among poor white people who believed they finally had a chance. They're finally going to get their voice heard. And guess what? Their voice wasn't heard either. And so their rates of suicide did climb in those particular red states among poor white people who owned farms and didn't get their community to hold them up during their greatest time of need. It's an interesting theorizing because it makes me think of Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. You want to go for a walk? So all of these things are basically to say the same message, that trauma heals in the presence of caring others. And the next thing that I want to share with you, so those were stories, right? Indigenous stories. Like when stories are shared, what kinds of spaces are opening up for you? Are they different? Different kinds of ways of knowing, physical, emotional, psychological, cultural? Maybe memory is a way of knowing, right? I'm just spitballing. Nobody ever said that. So I want to offer next land walking, reading, and storying the land as a methodology that can also be engaged for the similar reasons. Walking, reading, and storying the land involves joint activity that it emphasizes Indigenous relationality. It reflects our different ways of understanding the world and our ethical commitments about who we think we are in the world. And in learning sciences, well, I was going to say a lot, but really it's my advisor, me, like there's not actually a lot. In learning sciences, we're taking up land education as methodological approaches because of the embodied, because of the dynamic, because of the relational, because of the theories that the world that we make around us is a reflection and co-constituted by our designed environments and things like that. How we experience the world, how we feel in the world, depends, right, on our environment. Like if we were all sitting in a circle, it would feel a little bit different. And that's one small example. Or if you go to the fountain on a clear day and you look and you see this beautiful mountain in the background, and on each side of the beautiful mountain, you've got these towering, prestigious, larger than life buildings. Because that, my friends, is how world-class we are. We're even bigger than a mountain. Mount Rainier, to be specific. Did you also know that that view from Red Square all the way to that mountain is protected? Meaning you can't build higher. You can't build higher because you would ruin our prestigious view. But we work at a world-class institution. I'm so cynical. Gosh, I'm kidding. I'm actually one of the most hopeful and caring people I know. That's also just a joke. My advisor thinks I should take up like nerd comedy. And I'm like, wow, that sounds like a great idea. I don't know, like insightful but biting, you know? I thought it was a good idea. But all these theories, these practices, these knowledges that I've gained in collaboration with Cowichan members, but as well as Indigenous communities and people, as well as putting together the social work literature and combining it with the learning sciences literature, I brought all this to my graduate seminar. So now we're checking to see if these kinds of ideas and whatnot works with a heterogeneous group of adult learners. The purpose of this graduate seminar is called Land-Based and Indigenous Approaches to Health and Well-Being. And our purpose is really to connect some of the things that we're talking about today in terms of understanding Indigenous intellectual traditions, land-based theories, diverse perspectives, etc. Are we students in this group? Okay, so also my syllabus is 96% Black and Brown scholars, everybody. Yeah. I know. And then like 60% women or LGBTQ and Two-Spirit. I'm like, wow, look at me go. I never ever had that in my learning experiences. So I felt good about the world that day. But really, we did 3 different assignments in this class. We did a land ethnography where I asked students to go and spend 30 minutes at the same place, at a particular place, a special place. I didn't define what that place should be for them. I just sort of sent them on their way. And before we did that, we dove into Shirley Bryce, just a classic piece of ethnography by Dr. Shirley Bryce Heath, who says, what is ethnography? And we learned that ethnography was the close observation of social interaction between people, right? You guys were the examples in this. And I thought, and then I was like, I know, but we just want to do social interaction between ourselves and the land. What does that mean? Right? Like, and then I sent them all off to go and interact with the land in some way. They probably thought I was crazy, but wait until you see what happened. The next thing that we did was an epistemic journey, a writing reflection. So every week I would ask them sort of a thinking about thinking question. So they came into this, what do you think about land? Well, it's lovely to be out there and I love camping and whatnot. So a lot of the perspectives started off with this land as the backdrop, but not land as the relationship, right? So there was a difference, like the land is there for human consumption or entitlement in contrast to being in relationship with the land. And so that was the epistemic journey. I wanted students to think about it because now I'm trying to draw on different dimensions of learning, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, the cultural, the linguistic, and so on. And then we also did a concept map. So all these big words that we're saying, decolonization or anti-Black racism or any of these things, like put it together and explain to me why these kinds of things matter. Because a part of what we're trying to dive into is not just, like decolonization as some kind of a lovely thing to participate in, especially around Thanksgiving. Not that, right? But more so, why and how is my freedom as a Cowichan First Nations person, or as a white person, or as a Black or brown or immigrant or visitor or invited guest, whatever your intersectional identities are, we're wondering, and I think we all need to explore how are our freedoms intertwined, right? Because I could be over here really worried and busy with this whole Indigenous decolonization thing. You all saw the slides about the disparities and so on. There's a lot of work to do, right? But why do I need to care about, for example, the history of Black slavery in the United States? Because every single interaction is imbued with these different dynamics. Every single interaction, every single war that we've had in this world has a lot to do with ontologies of land. Whether they're discovered, whether they're promised, whether they're manifest destiny, like undiscovered or whatever, right? These are all ontologies of land, beliefs about land that shape the way that we act in the world, that shape the way that we treat each other. And so I wanted to do that. And I had one student who gave me permission to share their work. And this isn't a research study. This is just an example from a class because I didn't get IRB, but I will. And guess what IRB will say? This is not research. Have at it. Anybody? Oh, you guys don't do that kind of research. We often do qualitative research and they don't think it's real research. They're just like, just kidding. But anyway, so this was one student. And in the land ethnography on the very first day of class, I gave them the assignment, a piece of paper, and I just asked them to depict their response to this question. And so I didn't give them any ideas about how that should be, but I just wanted them to depict it in whichever way they wanted. And the student said, on the first day of class, Emma asked us, how did you get here? I drew and I contemplated who my community is and what land means to me. I thought mainly about my eldest brother, who was killed in an avalanche when he was 17. It was the winter of my freshman year of high school. I continue to feel most connected with him when I'm in the snow, especially with siblings and friends who knew him. I situate myself near mountains because I feel what I can only describe as spiritually grounded and healthy in the presence of snowy high ground. So there's a lot to unpack here. When I asked, how did you get here? I didn't specify here as in this class or this campus or this state or even anything else. But for her, when I asked about that, what was going on for her was the impactful loss of her brother. And she wasn't a very old student, so this had to have been within the last 5 or so years. And then I had them listen to Dr. Leanne Bita Simpson in one of her lectures talk about sintering, which was related to snow. And it also snowed in January, by the way, when the student wrote this. I folded laundry and I listened intently to Leanne Bita Simpson narrate what she learned from snow. Sintering, she said, is a joining process, a transformative communal process that creates a fabric of former snowflakes bonded to each other. The first thing a snowflake does when it falls to land from the sky world is join bonds, actual physical bonds, with its neighbor. Sintering gives snow patches staying power long into spring melt. I was captivated by her reminder that snowflakes are in fact unique, But when they act in mass and commune, they form magnificent storms, upheavals, and blankets. So this student went on her own to learn about snowflakes and avalanches and these kinds of things, because she had begun thinking about it now that we were talking about water theory in our land class. Oh my gosh, that was dramatic. Well, anything down there? And other gender people. So she was thinking about and interpreting and using her sense of metaphor, right? To try to understand and make sense of what was going on. Do you guys need this? Can we go back to like that centering one? Thank you, Leah. It's a lovely photo. Oh, she's with Story. Okay, perfect. So let's see where we were at with this. And then she carried on in her epistemic journey to share, no doubt it is my relationship with my brother that connected me on an emotional level to Leanne Bitasama Sake Simpson's story. Such stories are also the stories we often remember. Simpson's poetic description of sintering reminded me of the way snow sags under pressure from my feet, knees, and hands, how it sloughs off and shelves, and the sound I heard when I witnessed an avalanche break bonds in a collision with rock. I connected Simpson's reference for snow to the way Megan Bang framed dam removal as humans remembering to respect the river. Water's existence is not for the sake of humans. For the first time, I considered what responsibilities snow, and in particular avalanches, have within an ecosystem. She carried on to share, learning about an avalanche's responsibilities shifted the way I understand my brother's death on an ontological dimension. His own life was a part of an important exchange within a system of relationships. I learned that nurse logs and decomposers play an essential role in nurturing a forest. And I remember that human death is not apart from magnificent ecological changes that scale time and space. Avalanches, like death, play a role in life. And so I've highlighted some of the words here that jumped out at me when I was taking a look at this. She took this and she engaged Indigenous pedagogies, that's teaching and learning practices like story and metaphor and sort of this understanding and learning from the natural world about what she could learn about her brother's death. And that part to me, human death is not apart from the magnificent ecological changes that scale time and space. When we buried my dad in 1987, he was 43 years old and he died of a heart attack. But it wasn't his last heart attack. And our cultural beliefs for him meant that he wasn't going to choose an open heart surgery, for example. Right? And he understood that he would be returning to the earth. So he didn't want to have all the different kinds of chemicals for the embalming process. So we gathered natural herbs for the embalming process. And he selected a cedar tree that had fallen down recently from one of these storms. And that cedar tree would be the box that he was buried in. And he had 10 children, a lot of us under the age of 5 at home. And yet he wasn't seeking out open heart surgery and these kinds of things. And most of the time people say, what? That's crazy. Are you kidding me? Why? You know, like he let Creator call him home when the time came. That's his belief. And it's this understanding that through even all of our cultural practices at their core are about life, death, and rebirth. Oh no, it's under there. And so I feel like the student was sharing some of those perspectives, right? In a US contemporary society, we often strive to look younger and live longer and all of these kinds of things, like this major fear. But somehow, you know, and I don't know where the process is here, but you can see that this example demonstrated the shift in understanding about existence and okay. Don't. And so for me, there were so many different things connected in that example. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. How do we shift our understanding about who we are in the world? Because for this student, she became the location of her own healing as co-constituted with land. I had nothing to do with that. And I feel like that's powerful, right? And that we often like recognize and know that these kinds of things take place about the land or feeling peaceful, or you know how she described feeling peaceful with the land and that kind of thing. So we know that we need to take up work that's social and political and consequential. 88 years. Localizing Indigenous knowledge and practice. We can do that. Indigenous knowledges, the thousands and thousands of different Indigenous knowledges all around the world that have arose from the ground up, rather quite literally. That's how our languages were built. That's how our identities, our understandings, and also therefore the way that we think about the world in relationship with the natural world, right? We recognize that heterogeneity is fundamental to both learning and healing, that we can collaboratively and co-develop approaches, necessarily so, that they must be locally and culturally relevant. So what I'm offering is some sort of a pluriverse, if you will, where we have the multiplicity of all of our knowledges, and we have the same kinds of social and political and ethical commitments. And this, you know, these folks are doing these kinds of work and these things are doing these kinds of things. I think we can do that kind of thing. I think that that's probably how maybe knowledge is organized. I don't know. I think we should have a conversation with Heidegger or something, right? Like the nature of being and all that kind of stuff. But we do know that when we center Indigenous relationality, that's directly antithetical to that individualistic and categorized and hierarchical models that have been implemented to organize human beings in particular ways. Or we just all are intra-related and dependent upon each other in the natural world. So as we consider this and think about our own directions and pathways forward, we offer these kinds of questions. What does it mean to live healthful lives? Is this reflected in education? Is it reflected in global mental health? When we talk about, you know, the integration or the balance or the harmony, like different fields take up these different kinds of things about well-being. And then there are definitions about well-being, right? Like from a psychological perspective, I think it has to do with integration. But when we think about this, and we all don't have to have children, but how do we want our children to learn? What do we want them to know? How do we want them to heal? Because when we start thinking about that vision, that's the stuff that we're fighting for today. That's what we're fighting for. And I'm not talking about like your own children specifically. But, you know, we have the opportunity to re-narrate our story. We recognize that stories are transmitted across generations, that they help co-constitute knowledge, that they help heal from trauma, that they help us narrate our identities. That's why her name is Story, by the way. And he's Caspian because he was in utero during the 2016 Fight for Clean Water, the Dakota Access Pipeline Fight for Clean Water at Standing Rock. And I wanted a name associated with water, but in my own language, the name associated with water didn't roll off the tongue in the way that I wanted it to. So we went with Caspian, which is after the Caspian Sea, which is the largest inland lake in the world and is not a sea actually after all. What is the story that we want to tell? And do you think that every single one of us can participate in strengthening these nature culture relationships or these understandings of who we are in the world? Do you think that we have a responsibility, no matter what or where we are, to participate in that? And I'm wondering if all y'all want to be a part of the revolution and evolution of what needs to take place. Heitzapka, Siamnat Siaya. I give thanks to each and every one of you for being here today, for listening to these stories, and for thinking about how we can make this world a better place, not just for Caspian and for Story, but for kids just like them. And that hopefully we can be here for generations to come. Time it down. Oh yeah, look, perfect timing. It was like I timed it. So we have time for questions, thoughts. I know it usually takes a minute to gather oneself, because it's a bit of a different experience when you listen to that many stories, right? What about Caspian? Do you have any questions? Did we get it right, or did we miss something? Got it right so far. Then we'll keep trying.
I have a bit of a darker question, unfortunately, but you did talk about like trauma and like healing within the community. What do you think, or like how then would that apply to like generational trauma, perhaps? And those kinds of things that are kind of like transmitted down from older generations.
Yeah, so historical trauma is more of a community level, wide scale trauma that happened at particular times and continues to impact people, whereas intergenerational trauma has more to do with the trauma that's passed down, like, for example, substance use through families and those sorts of things. And when I think about my answer to that question, I think about the people who came to Deer Home for their own healing and for their own, for their own healing on the land. Like, I think that there's a lot that can go into. I think it can be quick, I guess. But I mean, I know that I'm really detrimental when it comes to like certain timelines and the climate crisis and things, because there isn't really any time for us to just be like, somebody will do, right? That's not. And thankfully, you can see this generation of people are about to change the world. So we're good. Did you guys know that the same folks who are out there in that particular age group on campuses all across both North and South America were 10 years old when 27 people were gunned down at Sandy Hook? 20 of them were 5 to 7 year olds. So now you have all these 20-something-year-olds out there who've been hiding and huddling in corners for their entire educational careers. That literally means that their education has been under siege from the get-go. Wow. And so you think about like the social and emotional landscape, right, of agency and empowerment and voice and strength and fear and uncertainty and chaos. And then I think about the rhetoric or the narratives that we give our young people. A lot of them, some of the same kinds of rhetoric and narratives that I've been offering you today. And yet we often don't follow it up with but there is a pathway forward. Like Indigenous knowledge systems has so far protected 80% of the world's biodiversity. It does recognize that we are necessarily connected and interrelated with each other and with the land. Like we don't get any more water and, all those kinds of things, right? And somewhere along the way, as an entire society, and I'm including us, right? Me, Indigenous people as well, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. We've been shaped to think about the world and ourselves in really particular ways towards really particular harmful, violent, extractive, and exploitive ends. Thank goodness we're still good people, right? See, biting humor thingy. I have a second career if necessary. So any other, I guess I didn't totally answer the question, but I do think that, I don't want to say magical, because we know that there are mechanisms that are put in place for particular reasons in order to cultivate or facilitate a particular outcome. So we know it's not just like go to the land and have a good old time. Like We talked about the quality of the caring relationship. We talked about the designed environment. There's a whole bunch of other things that go into it. But I do think that we could do the same kind of thing if we're looking at historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, or even individual level trauma.
I also wonder possibly if community, as you were talking about, has to look like familial community. It could be a community you created for yourself as well. And so when I think about generational trauma, when you're trying to heal in community, it does not have to look like revisiting trauma, the spaces where you were experiencing.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that. So community doesn't have to be blood community or family community. It's built community, right? Like, what is it that you imagine will hold you up when you're crumbled on the bathroom floor and you think that that's that? When your heart is that broken, right? How do you get through? That's your community. Those are your communities. It could be, in my case, creator, in my case, family, in my case, ancestors, in my case, the plants and animals. Have you ever gone to the water when you're really, really sad? I know. What is it? Exactly. Even if it's, I mean, and I'm not just talking like, have an Epsom salt bath. Like, sorry, y'all, if you're all trying to be a part of the evolution and revolution, you really don't have time for an Epsom salt bath, unfortunately.
I'm a lead guide from the Riverways Educational Partnerships Program. And I wanted to relate, because we work with Indigenous kids from rural and tribal reservations all over Washington State. And I can make the connection with, we had a teacher talk about why they rarely have school field trips. And it's because they said it was just not too long ago when the government came and stole their children away. And yeah, in a way, even though I don't identify as Indigenous, I do have refugee heritage, and my dad was just a child when he was put in Vietnam War re-education camps. To focus on child mental health as well as cultural ways of healing and to heal from intergenerational trauma. Oh, by the way, I have a lot of opportunities involved with the Riverways program, and we have our 5th graders and our 7th graders coming from the Nia Bay area, and I think Curlew coming to UW's campus. It's gonna be really exciting.
Oh, when are they coming?
I think near the end of this month. I think on the May 20th or 30th.
I love going out to the Makah Nation. It's beautiful out there. But yeah, thank you for sharing. I think there's a lot. There's a lot of similarities. I mean, even the camp was likely for the sole purpose of assimilation and managing people, biopolitical management of the people. I should write that down. Just kidding, it was Foucault.
So I don't really heard this, and you might have to help me with this question. I have healthcare experience and I'm interested in progressing my healthcare career, of course. So I'm jaded. I'm a little cynical as well because I see so many providers or just the healthcare team in general talk about how we need to put this emphasis on mental health and psychiatric care. And to me, I used to be big on like healing and ancestors and all this, but then to me it would just look like this healing. I don't know if this makes sense, but it almost feels like what do you do when it feels like it's a privilege, like it's about luck, like not everyone is going to get this, and how are we going to work in this system, I don't know, to make it more widespread, to be more helpful to others?
So can we enact the kind of transformational change that we want to from the standpoint of the institution?
Yes.
What do you guys think? Just kidding. Just kidding again. That was burn it all down. I'm just kidding. I don't have.
You're
it
not
there yet.
kidding.
Do
You've
that-
been there.
Do that next year. We can do that next year. I'm just teasing. You know, I don't think that I would be here if I didn't think that I could do that. I don't think that I can change the institution, but I do think that I can be someone who can speak to the institution and back to the institution in such ways that will bring resources to bear for the people that I love and care about. So brown and black people probably have twice as much work to do because we, not only do we have to like do the whole like speak back to and whatnot, we also have to like validate all this kind of stuff with y'all, with like empirical base, this, that, and the other thing. So, you know, but I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think everybody will have a particular kind of role, and I don't think that we're at the point where we can exist without. You know, because people haven't imagined what the what's next part looks like yet. And if we don't imagine what the what's next part looks like, then we have to hang tight in the for now part. So. Probably not, honestly, because I just spent $700,000 in a child custody case related to cultural identity, and we'll be here in Seattle until 2039 on a 50-50 schedule, not being able to return home to our cultural community except for 3 or 4 times a year, which is very much not the same as growing up in the community. It's more like growing up in Seattle, sort of as so-and-so's cousins, if you will. So I don't know. I don't think that that can change. I think, you know, we have to do what we can, and we have the responsibility to take on the pieces that we can and know about, you know, like I still have privilege. I still have a good job. I still have all these kinds of things, right? So there's still responsibilities that I have to the people, not just my own children who couldn't return home, but to all of those other people, right? So I think for me, that's how I came to it, but I do think this is an individual thing, right? What, you know, you don't come to health, I don't think because of the money, right? It's probably because you cared deeply about trying to make a difference in the world. And so I think we can make a difference in the lives of our loved ones. I don't know that we can make I don't know that we can transform the institution entirely to be what we want. That's not how it was made. Because it was, you know, it was made to be extractive. It was made to ensure Indigenous land theft and all the psychological and physical moves to you know, managing people and their bodies. Like those are on purpose. Right, and that's how these institutions were actually built. But we do need people who can speak back to those institutions. We need people who can make those transformative differences so that they can create space for people like us to be a part of it, because we want to be some of the people who are contributing to the thinking. That's how I see it, I guess, for now. Or just burn it all down. No, I have like 1 million degrees. Like, obviously I stuck around for a reason, right?
Hi, thank you. It's really like one of the classes. But related to this is, I come from Kenya, and Kenya was a British colony. And how the colonization comes in. People, you know, people still partition, but we find that colonization is very violent. In terms of knowledge, disruption and everything. The whole culture was disrupted. That people, there's no identity beyond colonization.
There is not.
Identity beyond colonization. That if you want to go back and say, how would this thing being done? Given most African society, knowledge was passed by word of mouth. And some of those things were banned. 100 years or so of colonization wiped out almost like the memory of people. So now people identify with something that if you want to go back and see how a great grandfather did, you can't even get the original version of it. So it becomes very difficult. you want to go back to fight, you get now, you have no alternative than to live by what was prescribed by
That's fascinating.
the colonizing.
So you don't know anything different.
Most of the time, we don't know it's different until now. We're trying to think about it and saying, like, oh, what we just find out, all these things were just Victorian era policies. Our culture was so different, but the masses have been fed by all these things until, if you tell them the truth that this was not our culture, it was imposed on us in a violent way. They won't even
So-
believe you.
When you're talking, I'm thinking of Judith Butler, who wrote about settled ontologies. It is what it is. And I learned about that when I was talking to a friend of mine about teaching our children, and my friend is a Black mother, teaching our children how to respond as Black boys to police officers. And she was telling me that she felt so strongly about making sure that she had this conversation with her Black son, especially as he was about 12 or 13 years old. And the father, which was a Black man who had experiences with police officers, was just like not on board with it, because he was just like, it is what it is. Like, essentially, they're just gonna kill us. I mean, that's a settled ontology, right? And I asked the same kind of question, like, okay, so in Cowichan, I know what kinds of economic systems we had, so I have particular kinds of ideas about what that might look like. But if there was no capitalism, what would that economic system look like? You able to imagine something? Or does it seem kind of like none of it would be possible? Without what?
Not without a huge part of the world just falling. I feel like since capitalism is just such a huge part of US history and a part of colonization, and I mean, post-globalism, I don't think that there's like any country that can like participate in world economics without basic.
So I don't know the how either, but when I ask that question, a lot of folks, we can't imagine, right? That's really hard to imagine. But the truth is, how old is capitalism? If we go to Marxism, we're talking like 1,000 years max. You guys would believe me no matter what I said, I think. I have no clue. I have no clue. But I'm guessing that like 1,000 years, maybe 1,500. It's not that old. The version of capitalism that we have right now is not that old. It might even be under 500 years old. 1,600?
Well, I mean,
But I'm just saying, like, in the large time scale of things, it's actually not that different, right? And I don't know what'll happen, and I don't know how it'll transform, but when I read things like A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, she did an investigation of all the different image analysis following four different disasters. Katrina, 9/11, 1906 earthquake, and there was one more. I can't remember it at the moment, but in essence, what she found, in contrast to the media and the state, that was like, oh my gosh, everybody's gonna be looters and anarchists, and they're gonna go crazy. Like, that's the nature of humanity. When in reality, what they found in all of those different examples were that through deep chaos like that, once those structural inequalities were removed, it was deep solidarity, deep mutual aid. People are gonna, I walked through the camp the other day and somebody's like, hey, if you want your own personalized guitar song. I mean, if I had time, I would have like literally had my own personalized guitar song, or getting my fingernails painted by queer people who I think probably paint nails better than all the other people. So just like thinking about what are the kinds of things that emerge once we remove those structural inequalities. Because I think that at our core, we do as human beings naturally like move towards helping each other. And Mother Earth at her core will restore herself and be okay no matter what. She's got billions of years. We have 88. I mean, unless we change course. So like we noticed during when we were all shut down, right? In the Puget Sound, we noticed the humpback whale came back to the Puget Sound. We noticed that now more orcas are living and being able to survive beyond the early years. We saw all the memes on Facebook or whatever social media everybody is into these days. I'm 46, so it's Facebook for my generation. But we saw all those memes about like the smog lifting and things like that. It happened really quick. We were in lockdown for less than 6 months. So 4 months later, it was like this whole entire new brand spanking new, what have you. If we just left her alone, bam, she would be amazing. If we, you know, I'm pretty sure if we made illegal fossil fuel, we probably all have cars running on solar energy by Tuesday. Right? It's not like we don't have energy. Comes up out every single day. It literally doesn't go anywhere. Perpetual, sustained, and humongous. What else are you thinking about?
Supposed to. Widespread. But it's everywhere. It's civilization, slavery. Doesn't have to be that, but it's as widespread as it is because horrific.
Sorry,
It's violence, you know? So like,
how would I imagine actually enacting that kind of change? Is
there
anyone?
any way that we can make an upheaval of such like that? A system like that without responding with similar levels of violence?
Ah, that's a good question for your generation to figure out. Have you ever read Adrienne Maree Brown's Emergent Strategy or heard of it? Because when I think of how do we enact that wide scale change, we often get hung up like, oh, but I'm not comfortable going to the protests, or I don't have time, or I have young children, or we think that we can't participate. And yet at the same time, like, that's that sort of designing for the pluriverse thing that I was talking about, right? Like you don't have to do it like I do it in my community, but if you're committed to human existence, seems like a very rather good common interest. No? Anyway, I feel like there's something about this emergent strategy thing that when I read that one time and I'm like, way too poetic and beautiful. I don't even know what she's talking about. And then I read it again a few years later and now it's brilliant. So if you haven't read it, go back again and check it out. It will bring some hope and some inspiration, and it's based on sort of our observations of the natural world and thinking about, you know, fractals, like this little minute thing and how it becomes this big thing. Because you want to know what started the Black Lives Matter movement? And mother's Facebook post, a tearful plea about her Black children. That's it. And guess what? Now they have, they've had incredible movements around the last few years or so. And they even have like defunding police efforts in Minnesota and Seattle and other places. One more Facebook.
What I like about passed away Russian politics Navalny. He liked to say that in order to bring the big changes into the country, you don't have to go all in as I do, like as you say, right? Because you will burn out very quickly. But as long as you do it 15 minutes a day or a week, or like on a constant basis.
And everybody has their part, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you all for being here, for staying late. I mean, isn't 4:30 late?
4:30, but it's the end of it's at the end of our event, yeah.
Yeah.
We all stayed through.
I appreciate all of you and thank you. And you can reach out if you have any questions. Well,